QSO Today episode 252, David Reed, W5SV. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers for the radio amateur that are ready to enhance your contest season beginning with ARRL Field Day in June. And by QRP Labs, Hans Summers G0 UPL's QRP Kit Radio Company. Hans has an amazing catalog of radio kits and parts for every budget. I want to thank both ICOM and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, 4Z1UG, your host. If you're a long-time listener, you may know that I have an alter ego where I'm a stage musical performer for an English-language theater company in Jerusalem. We've been in rehearsals for months and are now in the theater this week and next week in our production of Pirates of Penzance. I play one of the pirates and later one of the Cornish policemen sent to duty and slaughter at the hands of the pirates. Of course, Gilbert and Sullivan, the authors of this 19th century musical, would not let "Ye heroes go and die. Happy endings rule the day." I share this with you because I know that many of you have other interests, including performance, outside of amateur radio. And while it leads to a hectic schedule and a lot of late nights, like Jell-O, there's always room for ham radio. David Reed, W5SV, was on a visit to Israel when he contacted me to find out more information about our country as an amateur radio operator. Usually the hams that contact me are in such tight schedules that we often do not get to meet in person. However, Dave's story intrigued me, so I asked him to spend an hour with me between his appointments over the phone. Dave may have been the youngest new licensee in Mexico when he first got on the air. His story proceeds from there with some unexpected twists and turns that make this QSO Today interesting and unique. W5SV, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Dave?
I certainly am, Eric. How you doing?
I'm great, Dave. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. I should let the audience know that you're here in Israel visiting right now, and you reached out to me. When you told me a little bit about your story, I thought that you should be on the QSO Today podcast. So I welcome you to the QSO Today podcast. But let's start at the beginning of your ham radio story. When and how did it start for you?
Well, it started when I was 6 years old. I got interested in broadcast band radio, and I like to listen to it when stations went off the air locally, and you could hear the clear channel stations on. I was living in Mexico City at the time, and we couldn't afford to buy me a radio, and my father didn't want me staying up late at night doing this nonsense, right? So a friend of his said, "Well, look, why don't we just build them a radio? You know, we'll buy a junk TV chassis and scrounge parts and build him a little radio, and he'll build it so he'll learn something out of it, right?" So this was Andres Evergeni, XE1LA. And the first set I built was a little crystal set, and of course it had rather limited range. And we had to scrounge some earphones somewhere. But, wound a coil on a round box and built a crystal detector, out of a chunk of crystal, literally, and a cat's whisker thing, a little wire probing it, and threw a wire up to the top of the apartment building, or actually lowered one down from the top, and in the window, and connected to a cold water pipe for the ground. And lo and behold, there I was picking up stations, which I loved, but it was inadequate. So then I built a one-tube radio, again under Andres's guidance, XE1LA there, under his guidance, and I was off and running.
Now, can I ask you, you're an American citizen.
Yes.
Can I ask why you were living in Mexico City at age 6? Was your father a diplomat?
My father was a Mexican citizen, and he had been a foreign volunteer into the Army Air Corps. And when he was discharged in San Antonio, he tried making a living in the States, but it didn't work out real well. He married my mother there. She was of German extraction, and they moved to Mexico City.
So that explains the Mexican call sign.
Yes.
Okay, so let's keep going in your ham radio story then. It sounds like you have a great mentor, XE1LA, who helped you build your first tube radio. How did it go after that?
Well, it's kind of simple. I got in trouble for staying up late doing this broadcast band VXing. And so my dad was talking to him about this problem, and he said, "Oh, well, that's easy. Let's build him a shortwave radio so he can listen to shortwave stations during the day and get his DXing fixed during the day, right? So he'll get his sleep at night." So we built a receiver that basically was aimed at 40 meters. And, it was a simple super regenerative receiver. Excuse me. And I enjoyed it, but lo and behold, I heard these guys talking to each other because back then in the 50s, nobody had single sideband yet. At least I think in the mid-50s to late 50s they didn't, maybe towards the very end. A few people were experimenting with it, but I could hear these guys talking. And I said, man, that's like way more cool than just listening. So I was hooked at that point.
So you're listening to 40 meter AM probably, and where were you hearing Where were you hearing these conversations? Around Mexico, or actually hearing 40 meters from the States?
I was hearing Mexico, Central and South America, and the United States primarily. I wasn't hearing very many Europeans.
So how did you get your first license? Did you take the test down there?
Yes, I did. This was kind of a funny thing because in Mexico, you have to be, I think it's 16 years old. It may have been 18. I don't remember. But I wasn't qualified age-wise to take the test. But I have relatives in the Mexican government. And so they arranged to let me take the test anyway. They were going to just give me a license, right? And my father said, no, make him earn it, right? So that's what happened. So I had to take the code test and a little bit of theory. And I got my license, but of course I couldn't transmit yet because I didn't have a transmitter. And so, again, my mentor helped me figure out how to build a beat frequency oscillator for my radio and a single tube transmitter. And he gave me a couple of crystals to, be rock bound like most novices in the States then were. Well, I should say all novices back then were. I got started on 40 meter CW.
And how old were you when you got your first license?
Just short of 7 years old.
Wow. So you could be one of the youngest hams in Mexican history. Maybe even in American history. I think there's another guy that may have you beat, but
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if I was beat. I mean, it's just a question of how badly do you want it, right?
Yes.
Are you really willing to make the effort it takes?
And what was your first call sign?
XE1YYK.
And do you remember what year that might be?
Might have been 57. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. It would have been late 57.
So you were entering a big sunspot cycle as well. So, what a great time to be a ham, huh?
Oh, yeah. It was tremendous. I mean, I didn't understand about sunspot cycles or anything at the time. And it was really amazing because when I started building more complicated receivers and more powerful transmitters and all, I mean, I was like working all over the world. And I guess there weren't a lot of Mexican hams at the time that did CW. And so I became quite popular, if you will, for providing CW contacts.
And how long did you operate your single tube transmitter and your super regen receiver on 40 meters before you upgraded?
I would say a couple of years.
And what did you upgrade to?
Well, let me see. It seemed to me that it was I'm thinking I was going to skip a rig. I built a 3-tube receiver, and I think the transmitter, I think it had a 6146 maybe.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and it was plate modulated, so I could do AM or CW. I used that for a few more years, and then my grandfather bought me some night kits from Allied Electronics.
So that would be like the AC-1, something like that?
I seem to think it might have been a T60 and maybe an R100 or an R55. I don't remember right now. My memory's kind of fading.
Okay.
But they were early night kits, maybe second or third generation, I would say. Yeah, so that was fun.
Did you spend all of your childhood in Mexico?
No, I left home when I was 14 due to family problems. I came up to San Antonio, Texas by myself at the age of 14. And so I was distracted from the hobby for a few years, getting myself established here.
So the new QTH became San Antonio.
Yes.
Did ham radio play a part then in the choices that you made for your further education and career?
For education, no. For career, yes. Education-wise, I got my bachelor's degree with 3 majors: philosophy, psychology, and art. And it never occurred to me that I would require a technical degree to go into a technical field. I mean, I was just naive. But, I mean, there's no other word for it, is there? And so one of the students in one of my graduate philosophy classes was a woman whose husband was a vice president of engineering and R&D at a company called Computer Terminal Corporation. And I had just graduated from undergraduate school and was taking a couple of graduate courses. And I was looking for a job, and this woman, her name was Florence Poore, Poore, said, well, my husband Vic is hiring technicians, and maybe you can get a job with him over at Computer Terminal Corporation. So I went and interviewed for a job, and they gave me a job as a technician, but told me if I could help them sufficiently technically that the lack of a degree wouldn't hold me back, that they would promote me to an engineering position. And so sure enough, I did good. And although I didn't know a lot about digital electronics when I started, I managed to learn enough. And I think the RF background really helped, because a lot of people that do digital design don't understand that they're dealing with RF, and the higher the frequency of their digital circuits, the more those RF characteristics have to be taken into account in the design of the circuit. Back then, we were talking clock frequencies of 1 or 2 megahertz. So
in the HF band, right? So
yeah, so exactly. I mean, now you've got in the gigahertz ranges, but back then in the early days, I mean, we're talking the integrated circuits were basically primarily RTL, and TTL was just starting to come into play, and it was very small scale. I mean, you might have a 14-pin package that had 4 gates in it.
Yeah, now what happened after that?
So understanding that kind of stuff really helped advance my career, and I was there. I designed various, boards that plugged into a computer, and did well, and I had an opportunity to go to Motorola to work in their microprocessor division, working on processors that were for General Motors for engine control units. Let's see, from there I went to Advanced Micro Devices.
All in Texas now.
Yes, all in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I was at Advanced Micro Devices 16 years. I started as a quality assurance manager and then went into the design group doing functional verification. And I headed up a functional verification group. And let's see, when I left there, I went to the University of Texas as a research fellow. Not a professor, but a research fellow. So I was doing research, basically. And I didn't like that. It turns out academia wasn't for me. It was a publish-or-perish environment. And well, I shouldn't say too much about it because the prime contractor was the NSA, but you can imagine publication wasn't a good idea.
And now this message from ICOM America. With the Dayton Hamvention in the past, we are moving quickly to the ARRL Field Day and contest season. Take the ICOM IC9700 along on your field day to work VHF-UHF modes, including single sideband and CW, and the digital modes. Why not demonstrate moon bounce or meteor scatter to your assembled club? The IC9700 is ICOM's newest SDR transceiver that is fully operational in all modes on VHF-UHF and 1.2 GHz. This full-featured rig includes color touchscreen, RF direct sampling on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, and independent dual receivers capable of duplex operation on your favorite passing satellite. Power output on 2 meters is 100 watts, 75 watts on UHF, and 10 watts maximum on 1.2 GHz. Of course, this rig can be remote controlled over the Internet with an optional Ethernet interface and software from ICOM. The ICOM IC7610 is the SDR every ham wants both in his shack and on his field day site. This high-performance SDR has the ability to pick out the faintest signals even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. The ICOM IC7610 is a direct sampling software-defined radio that will change the world's definition of a software SDR transceiver. This rig, too, has independent dual receivers, allowing you to be ready to pounce on DX or contest stations in one band while working another. Finally, the ICOM IC7300 has changed the definition of the entry-level HF transceiver. This compact footprint that almost exactly matches the IC9700 also includes RF direct sampling, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, and real-time spectrumscope or pan adapter. ICOM America has the rig for your field day tent or ham radio shack that matches every amateur radio operator's level, skill set, and ability. Be sure to visit your favorite ham radio store to take a look at these fine rigs in action. Click the ICOM image on this week's show notes page to get to the ICOM America website. I want to thank ICOM for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Remember, when you buy your next ICOM rig, please be sure to tell them that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO Today. No, I was going to ask, it seems to me, based on your age, that and your American citizenship, that probably from you were born in the United States or you were born in Mexico?
I was born in the United States. My
Right.
mother, being German, didn't think the birthing rooms in Mexican hospitals with no screens on the windows and flies buzzing in and out and all that, they didn't meet her sanitation standards. So
That means that your age and the time that you were in the States, that you would have been eligible for the draft to Vietnam. Did you end up being drafted?
no, I joined when I was 17.
In the middle of all this, you joined the U.S. Armed Forces at age 17.
Yes, sir, the Marine Corps. Yes, sir.
So let's go there for a little while.
Sure.
The education came after the Marine Corps.
Well, I would say that it came.
A different education.
Yeah, I would say that my scholastic education, if you will, was partially in the Marine Corps and partially out of the Marine Corps.
What did you end up doing in the Marine Corps?
Sure. So my MOS, or military operations specialty, was EOD, or explosive ordnance disposal. So basically, aside from being on patrol as a rifleman, as you know, everybody in the Marine Corps is a rifleman. I don't care if they're a cook or anything else. Everybody's a rifleman. But when we'd come across booby traps, it was my job to deactivate them. And, basically that was it. I did get wounded while I was in Vietnam. I was there 13 months. I got wounded. Not a big deal, but I got my first Purple Heart there. And I got sent back. Basically, they let me get a little more education, keeping time and grade. And they put me through OCS and then pilot training and shipped me back to Vietnam flying A4s.
They sent you back to Vietnam flying A4 Skyhawks.
Yes, sir.
Amazing. What was your tour of duty there?
Well, like I say, 13 months the first time as a ground troop.
Right.
And then I did several tours. One on the ground in Vietnam, flying, I should say ground-based, flying out of a Marine Corps air station in Bien Hoa. in Vietnam. And I did 2 cruises on aircraft carriers, the Oriskany and the Bonhomme Richard.
Now, is it unusual for a Marine ground troop to become a Marine Corps pilot?
Yes, it's unusual to become an officer, let alone a pilot. But they do have a program. At least they had it then, whereby basically they call these kind of officers Mustangs. They come up through the ranks, if you will, as opposed to join after college, taking ROTC or something. And so, yeah, it was unusual, but not unheard of. They did have a program called MARCADS, which is like the Navy program NAVCADS, or Marine Cadets, Naval Cadets, that were qualified for pilot training without college degrees. And so they would put them through essentially the OCS and the pilot training as well. They had that program going.
Now, did you have to sign on for more time?
Well, yeah.
You enlisted, so you're already in for, 4 years?
Yeah, I signed in for 3 at the time, but...
And in order to become a pilot, you'd have to sign on for even more time.
Yes, sir.
And how much more time did you sign on for?
6 more years.
And did they include college education as part of that whole project?
Yes, sir.
One of the most amazing deals of the United States Army, isn't it?
Well, I have to tell you, the Marine Corps was very good to me. I got out thinking that I wanted to make a lot of money, and that the Marine Corps obviously wasn't the way to do that. But in retrospect, I probably would have stayed in the full 20 and retired out of the Marine Corps, because I really enjoyed the camaraderie and I guess being somewhat of an adrenaline junkie at the time, I kind of liked that too.
It's my understanding, at least, maybe from the popular culture, that people who are Marines are a tight culture into themselves. What would you think is the greatest lesson that you learned by being a U.S. Marine?
Teamwork. Absolutely teamwork. You're a little gear, a little cog, if you will, in the machinery of what's going on, and that it takes a team to make it work. And learning that really helped me in terms of working in industry more successfully, and even in my later career in law enforcement.
So that's an interesting transition point here. So you left the Marines, you went through college, you got your liberal arts degrees. I must say I have a liberal arts degree as well, and never thought I couldn't work in electronics without a BSCE. I learned differently, but I still worked in electronics. But then you also made a transition from industry and technology to law enforcement. What happened there?
I was at UT as a research fellow, and I found it to not be very satisfying at all. I didn't have the same camaraderie that I had in the Marine Corps. I didn't have the same sense of accomplishment that I had in the electronics industry. And I decided, well, I'll take a step back and figure out what I want to do. And I got bored pretty quickly, and I live in a rural part of Travis County, which Austin is located in. And I thought, well, who does our law enforcement around here? Obviously, the Travis County Sheriff's Office. And so I thought I ought to find out more about it. I went and enlisted in their Citizens Academy so that you can get educated to do ride-alongs and et cetera, right? And I did that, and I thought, I could do this. I might be getting a little long in the tooth, but I could do this. So I went and got an associate's degree in criminal justice and went through the basic peace officer course and got licensed by the state of Texas as a peace officer. And then Travis County Sheriff's Office picked up my commission, and they put me to work as a deputy sheriff. But in the process, they have what's called a board interview. So it's a board of like 6 people that interview at the same time. They take questions and take turns getting under your skin and et cetera, to see how you react under stress and et cetera. So it's a useful interview technique, but it's very, uncomfortable for the interviewee. And on my interview board, there was a major, a captain, 2 lieutenants, and 2 sergeants. So I felt like it was kind of top heavy, you know. And I mean, because I'm coming in at the very bottom. And the major asked me what my aspirations were, and I told him I wanted to be in investigations. And he kind of chuckled and said, well, you know, it usually takes a lot of years on the street before you get to be a detective and so on and so forth. And I said, well, you asked me what my aspirations were, not what I'd settle for now. To make a long story short, they took me on in the reserves. With the education, I was having trouble getting hired on as a regular employee anywhere because of my age. Most police departments, maximum age they're going to hire you in at is 45. And, you know, for a starting position. And so I looked at it and I said, well, you know, how about a reserve position? It's the same licensing procedure, the same tests, the same requirements, everything's the same except you don't get paid. I figured, you know, I have enough from my other jobs that I don't necessarily need a salary. So, I mean, look at that. So I started it, and pretty quickly I ended up working in personnel doing background investigations. And because I'm bilingual, I started helping out, translating jail calls, jail mail, conducting interviews with people over in the major crimes section. And they liked it. And I was getting bored over in HR doing background investigations. So we have a new law enforcement major. And I went to him and I said, look, you said we could break the chain of command to come to you with problems as long as we offered solutions too. And I've got a problem on board, and here's my solution. You don't have enough people working cold cases. Let me help out. And so he said, let me talk to some people about this and see what I can do. And within days, they had me over there helping out. And pretty soon I started helping on active cases because, you know, when in any police department, an immediate hot case gets more attention than cold cases.
Well, what is a cold case?
Oh, well, a cold case is something like from 1975 or 2002 or even 2016 maybe that hadn't been solved. It's gotten nowhere, and it's just kind of been on hold, if you will.
And for you, it seems like it's a mystery to solve.
It's a mystery, and somebody else has already tried to crack it, and it's very challenging. So, you know, I thought, well, they're not going to waste a normal person on that normally, or not spend a normal person on it, full time on it, but maybe somebody like me who's working 30 hours a week or something like that, they'll let me try it. So there you go. That's how I got into working cold cases. And cold cases that we pursue, you know, we don't look for weed eaters that got stolen 10 years ago, or lawnmowers, or cars that got stolen that long ago. So they're all like basically murders, violent crimes, rapes, you know, things like that.
That don't have a statute of limitations.
Well, they might have a statute of limitations, but it hadn't run out yet, or they may be like murder. There is none.
Right, so a cold case on a murder is still an opportunity for someone to find a solution. Right. And because of the peculiarity of statutes in Texas law, for example, the statute of limitations on a particular kind of aggravated assault that's sexual in nature, the statute of limitations might be 10 years, but it's not 10 years from the date of the crime. It's 10 years from when you've identified a suspect. So it's not ice cold.
Right, exactly.
Oh, that's fascinating. Let me take a quick break here to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast with George, KG6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. George and Jeremy document their projects and make circuit boards available for sale to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Even if you're a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, Be sure to join George and Jeremy for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO today. So, as a result of the demand for hot case solving, and they're seeing that you have ability to investigate, did they move you into hot case investigation?
Well, they did at first, but they decided that they were getting behind on cold cases, and so recently we've actually started up a cold case unit, and I'm in it along with a couple of other people, and we're, making progress.
And do you find that satisfying?
Very, very. It's both very satisfying and very frustrating. The very frustrating comes when you really have identified, say, the killer, but it turns out he's a hitman for a gang known as Mara Salvatrucha, or MS-13, and nobody's going to testify against this guy. And you don't have adequate DNA evidence or anything else to link him. So a known murderer goes away, right? I mean, he's free. And so that's very frustrating. But on the plus side, you sometimes get somebody on a rape that the DA's offered him a 20-year plea bargain, and he says no because he's sure the jury's going to let him off, and the jury gives him 50 years. And so that's a real win, and you like that. Same thing with turning up somebody's murderer after 30 years. They think they've gotten away with it, and you get them into the system, and the prosecution takes them to court, and they get them jailed, and it's a win. And once again, you're just a little gear in the cog that grinds out justice. So, this teamwork aspect goes all along with it.
Now, the reason that we met is because one of your friends listens to the QSO Today podcast, and he advised you that when you came to Israel that you should be in contact with me. And you're in Israel right now, and I'm speaking to you to your cell phone in Zichron Yaakov, which is a beautiful little community about mid-span on the Mediterranean coast. Why are you here, and what are you doing? And then it's my understanding, based on earlier conversation, that you actually have a history with Israel, and what is that history?
Well, I'll start with the history. In 1973, I made my first trip to Israel. The Defense Department was looking for volunteers to fly some A4 Skyhawks to Israel. Israel was using A4s, and they were losing them in the Yom Kippur War. And I thought, well, I know how to fly these things, and I kind of like Israel, so why not? I'll sign up for that. And I did, and we flew them in, and I ended up at a base called named Nevatim, which is near Beersheba, and made some friends there. And I've been coming to Israel ever since.
Wow, on a regular basis?
Well, I'd call it an irregular basis, but yeah.
Okay. And why are you here now? Did you volunteer for a program?
I have three purposes to my current trip. The first purpose was Volunteers for Israel. They hook you up with SAD-L, which is a Israeli agency that puts you on a IDF base, Army base, and you get to do things to help free up soldiers for their normal work. So, for example, one of the things our group did was we reorganized some contents of some warehouses and et cetera. And I got kitchen patrol. I got to prepare eggplant for several hundred people, somewhere close to 1,000, and that sort of thing, right? And so it frees up the cook to go do his normal business.
And your eggplant recipes here are a lot different than what you serve in Texas.
Actually, no, because I was serving grilled eggplant. You slice the eggplant. These are the long, thin eggplants rather than the kind of more pear-shaped eggplants.
Right.
And so you slice them in half lengthwise, and then you kind of score them on the inside a little bit in olive oil and salt and some spices and stuff, and then grill them. So, or put them in the oven to grill them, depending on what you got access to. And I do that in Texas just as well. So,
well, I don't think I've ever eaten as much eggplant as I do in Israel than I did in America. I think in Israel, we're the Middle East, and there's 39 different ways to cook eggplant, and you can buy 39 different kinds of eggplant in the store.
Absolutely. So I was right at home with it.
Okay, well, that's terrific. And the other reason, did you want to mention the other reason that you're here, or do you want to stop there?
Well, no, I'd love to mention the other reasons. One of them is the second reason was to visit some friends, and the third one was to explore different cities in Israel in terms of possibly moving here. I'm considering making Aliyah, or the return to Israel as a Jew, and I picked cities to look at that I thought my wife would be more amenable to moving to get a better feel for them, so that when I bring her here in the fall, we can kind of pick and choose more carefully than if I was trying to show her everything in a couple of weeks.
Which is it's a great idea to make a pilot trip before you come and move here. Yeah,
so I selected Haifa as a city that I already know fairly well and have friends in, and Nahariya as a slightly lower cost, kind of laid back, that has something of an Anglo community, so that my wife wouldn't feel totally out of it. And my wife is from Taiwan, so she's already dealing with English as a second language and has no Hebrew. So, trying to find a community that would be easy for her to kind of slide into was one of my objectives. And the third place was Zichron Yaakov, which is more of a suburban community. A lot of the houses here actually have small yards and so on. So, they all have a slightly different flavor, but they're all real nice.
Right, and Zichron Yaakov has a very interesting history to it. I'll put a note in the show notes page for Zichron Yaakov history. And, well, that's great. I'm happy you're here. Now, we have a very active amateur radio community in Israel. Are you in touch with the Israeli ham radio community except for me? And have you operated ham radio here?
I have been in touch on and off. And for the benefit of your listeners who may be considering a tourist trip to Israel, by all means, bring a QRP rig along and your license. You do have to bring a copy of your license along, but you can operate in Israel with it. And it'd be fun. I didn't bring a rig this trip, unfortunately, but I was packed pretty heavy to bring things. So
right.
Next trip, I'll try to bring my KX2 to do a little QRP operation.
But what you can also do if you're coming, you can reach out to the ham radio clubs here, and I'll put a link to that. If you can't bring a rig, then you'll actually find somebody who'd be happy to host you, and you can operate from their QTH. Or there's even a group of us that actually go out into the field with the QRP rigs.
Oh, that's great.
Almost on demand.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about your current ham radio activity. Were you active through most of your adult life as a ham radio operator?
Yeah, in Vietnam, for example, I actually operated some of the Mars stations. Where we were doing phone patches for soldiers back home. Back in the pre-cell phone, pre-inexpensive long distance days, that was how we did it. And then after that, of course, I started getting involved in HF from my own station when I got stateside again. And I currently have a 70-foot tower with a 3-element quad on it that works 20 meters through 6, 4 elements on 6 meters. I run a Elecraft K3 that's been upgraded almost to a K3S status. Every upgrade that I could get jammed in there without buying a K3S is in there, and I love the radio substantially. And let's see, a KPA 500, so a 500-watt amp. And I operate some digital modes. I've experimented with them, Whisper, FT8, PSK 31, PSK 64, this sort of thing. Of course, CW still, the original digital mode, if you will. But I'm currently on a quest to get the FCC honor roll on phone. And so I'm at 302 countries confirmed. So I've got a ways to go, but that's my current quest.
But your favorite operating mode is?
Sideband. I have the rare worked all states on 75-meter phone QRP.
I saw that that you're very active with the blind community. In what capacity do you help blind amateur radio operators?
Perhaps help isn't the right word, but I'll be glad to talk around it. One of the things I do is I have a couple of ham friends that are blind, and we get together every couple of weeks for breakfast and talk ham radio and stuff like that. And it's fun. And one of them is an author of some software for blind hams that, rig control and interface, and we'll give them Braille readout of the frequency and so forth, or activate the voice frequency readout if your radio has that capacity, and so on. And so, I've loaned him a K3 to work with on his software for a while, and when he's done, he gave it back. And I've helped one of my other blind ham friends set up his amplifier and get it all worked and integrated into a station so that it didn't require site intervention to get things working. So in that way, little ways trying to help when I can with time, helping people get their station set up, or just simple things.
Based on this relationship, would you say that from your friends that ham radio manufacturers are doing enough to make ham radio gear compatible with blind amateurs? Is there more that the manufacturing community could do in order to make this equipment more friendly?
I would think that they would be in the best position to answer that, but my gut feel is yes, they could do more. For example, one of the accessories that I really enjoy using is a pan adapter. I can spot, when DX is operating split, I can spot which stations he's coming back to and where he's listening based on, the pan adapter display. And they have no access to that. They just hear him saying up 5, and he might be listening 7 or 10 up. And so, having some way, if someone could digitize the information from a pan adapter and put it out on a push-up display that looked like, say, a bunch of pinheads, a matrix of pinheads, so that you knew the scale and you could feel along over here and see, oh, okay, here's this pip, it's up here so much. Having a interface that a blind ham could feel would be very useful. And I wouldn't expect the manufacturers to make the equipment, but if they made the interface so that someone else could make that specialized equipment and get that information out of it, it would be very useful.
The interfaces that most new radios now have to computers, it seems to me that once you have that interface to the computer, then you could do all of that management on the computer with the peripherals that go around the computer. Is that what you're finding right now? I mean, I know that, for example, cat control is in the K2 and other rigs. Do you think that those computer interfaces make these rigs more friendly for blind amateurs?
Oh, they absolutely do. I think they just fall short on things like the pan adapter display and stuff like that.
Well, there you go. Hopefully there's an entrepreneur listening who will come up with a touch display that touches back, right?
Yeah, that would be great.
What kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life?
Well, fortunately for me, not much, because all the time I was dating and et cetera, ham radio was a part of my life. So people either saw that and accepted it, or they didn't, and it never went any further. I would say that really it hasn't had any impact on family life other than, getting to share some of my excitement sometimes. Maybe it forced me to live in certain places that I wouldn't have otherwise. For example, I live on a little over 9 acres of land so that I can put up beverage antennas and have my tower and all that. I don't live in a community that says, oh, you can't put up an antenna. So maybe it's had that impact in terms of, places to live.
What do you think is the greatest challenge facing amateur radio now?
Keeping a active population involved. I think with cell phones, ready communication is so handy that people don't think of the benefits of emergency capability. They don't think of the entertainment possibility of getting to meet people they've never met, wouldn't know, and wouldn't run into otherwise. I've made friends in countries all over the world, and when I go traveling, I like to try to visit them, at least a few of them, get an eyeball QSO in, which is usually very gratifying. So I think the challenge of recruiting new adherents and retaining people is the biggest challenge. Some of the digital modes that have come up recently have done a good job of attracting people to come back into it.
Yeah, I think FT8 seems to be the thing that we most discuss, on the QSO Today podcast, as being something that's really a game changer for people, especially in this part of the sunspot cycle that we're in now.
Right, exactly. So, yeah.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
Well, I think the prospect of new rigs, software-defined radios, whether they're like the Flex approach, which uses a lot for of a computer interface, or like the Elecraft approach, which has a conventional-looking rig, but it's very much a software-defined radio. The progress there has been phenomenal. My little KX2 QRP transceiver has performance that I probably would have killed for in my youth. Just really amazing receivers and selectivity and sensitivity that's just unparalleled. Wayne and Eric are a really talented set of people, and they operate a tremendous outfit and recruit good people there for sure.
What advice would you give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
Antennas. If you're going to spend money, buy a not state-of-the-art brand new rig, get a slightly older rig and spend more money on antennas. Get an antenna up in the air where it'll do some good. Antennas give you gain both ways. An amplifier only gives it to you one way. So antennas. It's a lesson I wish I could have implemented. I learned it fairly early, but I couldn't have implemented it because I didn't have room or I'd already spent all my money on rigs.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. Absolutely great advice. Because if you don't have it out there, you can't hear it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I had a very early QSO Today conversation, and I'll put a link in the show notes page to that conversation, where as a DXer, he was also from Texas, was using a very old and poor rig on the one hand, but he spent all his money on cubicle quads, and he was a fantastic DXer because of the antenna. So I agree with you. Antennas are really the way to be at the top of your game with any rig.
Yeah, and antennas. Quads I love. best centennial I've ever had was a quad. I've had large periodics. I've had Yaggies. I've had phased array verticals. I've had loops. Quads are my favorite. The only problem is they're higher maintenance than a Yagi or an LP. So I guess as I age, I'm less adept at climbing towers and earning less money to pay people to climb towers. So I may have to get something more durable here in my future.
Well, Dave, you've been a great guest. I really appreciate your joining me on the QSO Today podcast. You've got a great ham radio story, and I'm looking forward to your being in Israel more, and we'll get together for an eyeball contact as soon as that happens.
Well, I look forward to it, Eric. Thank you.
73.
73s.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with David. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W5SV in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or when you make your purchases, that you say that you heard it here on QSO Today. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, and TuneIn, as well as the iTunes Store. If you own an Amazon Echo, you can say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." I still use Stitcher to listen to podcasts on my smartphone. The links to all of these services are on the show notes pages on the right side. Until next time, this is Eric 4Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.